It is Saturday morning, January 7th, 8th, 2022. Hi, everybody. This is Victoria Weinstein. Peace bang! And I am making a video for beauty tips for ministers because I just have a perfect opportunity, having had a very negative experience just a few minutes ago with a guided visualization or meditation or prayer practice. It reminded me of how many issues I'm seeing with this in our liturgies online and elsewhere, and I feel like I want to speak to it. There are different modalities of prayer practice that are all getting conflated in our practices with congregations, with retreats, with small groups. And on the outset, I would like to say that there is a difference between leading people in prayer, doing meditation, and visualization. And if you, as the leader, do not understand the difference and the purpose of all of these different modalities, and if you do not take responsibility for how you lead them, not only in the content, but in the delivery, pacing, breath work, holding the space, we can do a lot of harm. And I'm seeing this harm being committed in low-key ways and in really egregious ways over the past several years as I participate in services online and in practice, communities of practice. Let's talk first about communal prayer, about leading a congregation, a congregational prayer. A prayer is not a guided meditation. You need to understand what you're doing when you pray, and if you are going to lead people into some kind of imaginal space, you've got to introduce it responsibly and clearly so that people can choose to go in there with you or they can choose not to. One of the things that I see clergy doing all the time is just assuming that they have the authority and permission to lead a group of people with no consent and no knowledge of who that people is. I mean, when I say that people is, I'm talking about a people as a people, not just a group of disparate individuals. When we come together in congregational life, we are kind of presuming that we are a people. And if you are a parish minister and you know your people as a people, you do have, on some levels, the authority to say, we're a people who's going to enter into this imagining together. But so many ministers start off and they just kind of say, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in. And first of all, they're not grounded in their own bodies when they do that. And so they're actually counseling people. Most people who really want to go along with the with the practice because they want to trust us as people who lead public worship. They want to be in safe hands with us, so they'll start to breathe in and breathe out. And meanwhile, this person is at the head of the congregation or on camera or wherever and going, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. And you're not even leaving enough time for people to actually take that deep breath in and that deep breath out. Which is why I think that all of this breathe in, breathe out, let's remember to breathe, etc. A lot of that is just fake therapeutic language. And it doesn't even take into account that people breathe at different rates, that when you are in the middle of a worship service or a program, people aren't even, they're not ready to do this deep breath practice together. And there you are jumping right in like you have all been on a retreat for all weekend. And you're not. People are at home with a cup of coffee, or people are sitting in that chair and they're not sure what to expect. And you're starting with this sort of guru-esque, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. And I'm going, why? I'm already breathing. I don't need to be led into breathing. Like, you haven't introduced it. You haven't set the space. You haven't slowed everything else down. You've just kind of slid into it out of a hymn or something. So I have a lot of critique about that in general, as you can tell. And all I can say is, please consider where you're asking people to do that, how you're asking them to do that, and why. There is no reason. We all know that a prayerful, we all know that a prayerful stance is one that is present, centered, slower than usual. See, even my own voice got lower. When you go cruising into that out of a hymn or a sermon or a time of sharing or whatever, you have not allowed it for any of that to actually happen. And what you're doing, what we are doing, is actually controlling a community of people, thinking that we can do that just by a couple of words. And that isn't how it works. So that's my first really big observation, is this cruising right into breathe in, breathe out doesn't do anything. Very few people are going to be able to genuinely get there in your timing. You know, you are the one who crafted this whole liturgical structure. You know where you're going. They don't. They're still going through their grocery list or whatever in their mind. You don't know where they are. So please do not presume that you're in the middle of a meditative retreat when you're not, when you are in fact in corporate worship. You're not leading meditation. If you're leaving 10 seconds for people to enter into meditation, it's not adequate. Secondly, you're not a therapeutic community leader. I mean, you're not leading a therapy group. And so many things that I'm seeing that start, we all feel like this. Ministers are starting the worship service like this, naming for people what they think they're feeling. We come together today feeling distraught, being exhausted, feeling disheartened. No, you don't know that. You don't know that. Don't project. Don't name for an entire group of people what they are feeling. Opening words and call to worship should not be an introduction to therapy group for a bunch of traumatized people. And by the way, the word trauma, and you can tell I'm so angry about this. Trauma is a clinical term. If you keep using and invoking trauma in your worship services, you're leading a therapy session. You're not leading worship. You can invite people to worship by naming what we are doing, which is that we're gathered to worship. We're gathered to reflect on the highest. We're gathered to renew our sense of reverence. We're gathered to light the flame of faith, to rekindle our sense of hope or our sense of wonder, to give thanks for being alive, for being in community. Those are all things that we can do when we, and I'm talking to Unitarian Universalists mostly here, who write our own intro to worship invocations. If you're not invoking something but trauma, you're leading a therapy session, you're in a clinical pastoral setting, and that's not what corporate worship is for. So please reconsider that content and consider what you're doing and how controlling it really is and how much of a projection it really is when you claim to be naming for your entire community how they're feeling. You also don't need to name everything but the kitchen sink in the prayer. We're feeling like this. We're feeling like that. We're feeling like that. We're feeling like that. We're feeling like that. We're human beings. We gather as human beings in community with a variety of feelings and experiences. Don't try to name them all. There's no need, and it's wearying on the ear to try to listen to you enumerate all of that. Center yourself. Choose a focus. If you keep invoking trauma, that's a clinical term. please consider that you are not a clinician. You are a public theologian and you are a pastor. Suffering, fear, pain, all of those things are, part of trauma. But so we are also experiencing joy. We are also experiencing being perfectly fine many days. So our inclination to catastrophize everything and to generalize about the emotional state of our people is irresponsible. I'm going to return now to the also very irresponsible meditation or prayer practice that I just was part of a few minutes ago, and why I left that retreat that I paid to attend in the trust. Again, people come to participate in things with us. They trust us to be good, grounded spiritual leaders. And here's what I experienced. Someone was teaching what he calls a welcoming prayer practice. And he began with a group of 9 women in a Zoom room. He began by taking us through a visualization of important things that happened. I don't really understand. It was fine. I don't really understand how it connected to the welcoming prayer that he segued into. He also used the term gypped. He talked about, he asked us to remember or bring to mind a very welcoming, really warm and loving person who's amazing at gathering people in, welcoming them. He spoke of this person, this sort of ideal figure, as grandmotherly or grandfatherly. I thought that was interesting because age has nothing to do with that quality. I know the people that came to my mind were, quite young, in fact, who had that real gift of welcome. So that was interesting. Didn't have a problem with that. But then he spoke about, what if that person was welcoming everybody and passed you by? Wouldn't you feel gypped? So I went, oh my God, does he not know that that is an ethnic slur? Why would he use that term? So immediately, I was still following his lead. I was still present there, but I was like, ugh. When he led us into a meditation, he was doing the whole inhale and exhale, and he was teaching us these phrases for welcoming prayer. Some of them were very nice. Some of them were, naming the emotions that we may want to disown and saying, God, I give you my anger, or, shame was another one he named. And then as he continued on teaching us this practice, he used the phrases, I let go of my desire, which is very Buddhist, and a lot of us know that kind of, that structure of prayer. I let go of my desire to control, or so he was saying, inhale, I let go of my desire to, or I let go of my desire to change this feeling. Very nice guidance. Exhale. But he kept, oh, my kitty, you all right, buddy? He has some issues. Okay, honey. Then as he's going through these phrases, he comes up with, and I'm inhaling and I'm exhaling. And again, I'm feeling that I'm trying to trust someone who identifies as a spiritual leader who's teaching me a prayer practice. He says, I let go of my desire for security and survival. What? What? And huge blaring alarms go off in my head. Who the hell counsels participants in a group to let go, to relinquish their desire for security and survival? So irresponsible, so dangerous. You don't say that. Not unless you have spent a considerable amount of time in a contemplative community, going very deeply into a mystical kind of relinquishment of one's own life to God. But on a Saturday afternoon with a bunch of people you don't know who could be depressed, who could be in dangerous relationships, who could be, I mean, God knows what they're going through. And you're going, I let go, inhale and exhale. I let go of my desire for security and survival. There were people of color in that gathering whose mantra has been necessarily for generations, we have to survive. You know, we need to create a world where we can survive. And as a woman with living in a constant environment of sexualized violence and threat, I do not want some man telling me that I need to give up to God my desire for security and survival. That was outrageously a total pastoral and spiritual failure. It was so outrageous that I'm making a big deal out of it to impress upon all of us that these little phrases that we come up with that we think are really spiritual when we're just, writing it ourselves can be a blaring alarm of anxiety and destruction for people listening. And then he goes, and I go, and I immediately thought, I got to get out of here. I have to leave this room right now. But I thought, no, I mean, I'm fine. Let me see what else he comes up with. And then he goes into, I let go of my need for esteem and affection. Really, no context there. Why would God ask us to let go of our desire for esteem and affection? Why? How is that ever worthy spiritual guidance and something you would encourage somebody to think of in a prayer practice? Affection? Esteem? Like, who are you talking to? If you're talking to yourself because you have ego struggles, make sure you work out before you take these prayer practices to a group what you need to hear yourself and what's responsible to bring to other people. I let go of my desire to change the situation. He then counsels us to pray. Again, in a context of like a personal conflict with somebody or ego control, something like that, that's very wise, but he didn't put it in context. And again, I'm aware that there are women and there are people of color in this gathering who absolutely need to change the situation and need the strength and God's solidarity, sense of God being in solidarity with them and with us as the people of God to change the situation. So his failure to contextualize, his failure to take responsibility for the kinds of things that maybe he needed to hear versus what is actually loving and caring and wise to advise other people to pray was really, it was such a glaring example of how we can really blow it. So that I thought, well, I'm going to get right online and make and speak to this. We have got to spend just as much time crafting our prayers and preparing to guide people in prayer or meditation or visualizations than we do writing our sermons or preparing anything else that is part of the sort of more scholarly and intellectual tradition. Too many of us are cruising into these spiritual guiding roles, not having taken enough, not having considered deeply enough what our pacing is, what our context is, what our location is, who's really watching, are they, can they follow the breath like we think that they can, like we just assume they can when we go in there going, inhale, exhale, breathe in, breathe out? You better be checking all that. We better be checking all that before we inflict it on other people who are gathered to try to engage in spiritual practice and who trust us to guide them wisely, healthily and well in those practices. Thanks for listening.